Hello, everyone, and welcome to Masterclass. It is Coursera Masterclass, YouTube Masterclass, Coursera. And those are how you take classes by auditing the class. You can listen to all these different classes that I teach in one semester. And summer school, I've been doing that on film studies. And I'm Dr. Sheley, and it's very pleasant that you've all joined me for Masterclass. Now, that if you're here for something besides an academic cinema lecture, you probably won't find anything out. I mean, unlike traditional film reviewing and film criticism, we use those as tools to unlock what goes on with the film, like how the circuitry of a film sticks together. We're not necessarily studying just any one film or any one range of film, but rather those that appropriate and reappropriate in the postmodern way their very core of dynamic action or explosives or pyrotechnics. And they've been using those all the way back to the Great Train Robbery, which is Edwin Porter in the early silent era. And there's still those like framed explosive nightmares that seem like the character's there in the middle of it. And it's really like artifice. And that it's artifice doesn't bother us about film. Like, even that it's artifice doesn't make it not art. Because artifice just means you add on to the event to make it something new and bigger. You know, it doesn't have to have a negative connotation. Artifice, like, it makes you sound like, oh, well, that's not the real thing, but that's not the point. It's like the artifice of the thing can be better than the real thing. And so it's like, I don't think that's really where you quality judge the art. You know, you could get some mistake in that with postmodernism and get drilled with this idea that artifice is like, we added in the special effects so that we could sell the movie, but really, there's a ton of just different reasons why they add special effects, where they do in movies. And a lot of it has to do with seamlessness and how the shot from each shot editing is seamless to the next, because you can now match up the components of one shot with another and delay it perfectly on time with the other angle and still get them to match up. You know, that's something you only have with like digital video and film, like is the editing. And an editing process to start over here and end over here in the next shot, or begin over here in the next shot and end over here in the previous, it still clinches in and looks like the same hand waved because of the way they mark it off with tape and everything. These are things that are hard for early directors to figure out. Like that's why you tape from the camera to the actor, or at least look at it and see what distance you're filming at. You know, and what you're filming at or digitally recording is going to shape how the next shot looks. And usually it has information that the previous one couldn't have from where the angle was, but is still in the same scene when it's just a shot building on shots. And I know I'm supposed to call them editing, so let's try that. If you edit something and you edit it to look like it's spliced together genuinely, then it's part of a scene. But usually, except for a jump cut out of frame diegesis, if you had a frame delivered with a frame, that could be something that they're thinking in their mind as a character. But it could be also a notation of another scene that's going on while they're thinking about it. And when it goes between scenes, usually you call those different scenes, you know? Like, the scene is even the scene switching scenes is a scene, but that's a little complicated because once you have enough scenes, you have a sequence, and that's where everything's pretty much united in this sort of like one area of the film. And it's like this, all the theme runs the same way, the motif runs the same way. The director really takes off with style. And a lot of these things were brought to the forefront when Orson Welles was in the cinema club, like in the later, mid 30s, early 30s. And he was in the avant-garde club, and that he joined the avant-garde filmmakers young means that he was doing that around the same time that he was doing War of the Worlds when he broadcasted that live. I think it was from San Francisco in 1933 and 1934. He did it 2 years in a row. And he tried to like water it down the next year, but it still created panic and widespread chaos. So he was kind of like, the first time he did it, it wasn't like he was feeding into the widespread chaos. Like everybody said, oh, he was already a megalomaniac and was trying to encourage people with their words to really believe that there's aliens. And I'm like, if I don't know Orson Welles, he probably already thought there were aliens and thought them were crazy for not saying there were. You probably thought an alien attack was really imminent because even at that time, the H.G. Wells book that it's based on has already been written. So you can't, like, what are you going to blame H.G. Wells for the widespread paranoia? Or was it because he knew he was so saucy that he could deliver a speech so good that it'd be having people running for the hills? I don't think they had a distinct idea that they were going to influence people that way. And when he was kind of taking advantage of the first time, Orson Welles, but then by the time the second one rolls around, he's got all the safety latches on it. And he's also got the guy coming on the radio saying, this isn't real. This is just a test of the emergency broadcasting system. I mean, that whole idea kind of came out of the siren panicking of how War of the Worlds, the radio show that Orson Welles played so good. And that really earned him a spot among radio. I mean, that's why RKO jumped right on him when they realized he was a radio personality. And radio personalities is what they were looking for in RKO, and radio, it has radio something music. I don't remember what the letters stand for, but it's like, if I did know, I probably wouldn't tell you because they might mean something specific. They probably mean something random. It's like when you give letters to a station online or on the radio these days. You give your station's like number, but sometimes you can't always pick that and buy it out. Like, it has to be unbought out before, and you have to go through this long process of like researching which connections haven't been used and on the radio and which dial-up you can use, and if there's even some left. Well, in my small town of Grand Junction, nobody can mention that, by the way. I don't want people to know where I live. Just kidding. But anyways, there were things about the radio stations here that we don't have all of our positions bought out. That, like, there's most of the positions are bought out, but it's not like a big city, which by then everybody's feeding into like one large network of the city, and then that's like taken as where the radio lands. And you might know more than one station that has a different number to it. So, I mean, Orson Welles knew all this stuff going in, and like, he didn't really know he was going to get hired as a radio personality. But that it did happen that way is all right, because he was already familiar with the idea that, like, the film could backfire on him, or like that the audience could get backfired upon. And he never took it upon himself to say, well, I'm guilty for this crime. I spooked him out into realizing there were aliens. And like, for all we know, he was really hunting aliens. Like, anyone that deals with the sci-fi or like the idea of sci-fi knows that like the presence of another life force in the universe is technically, like, biologically concerningly real. I mean, because if we evolved from the tide pool that we did, then there's got to be other species out there somewhere that evolved from another way. I mean, there has to be. So, like, you think that they flew off the Earth, or maybe they just evolved to where they were on the other planet already. I don't know if there's a loophole in time. But does me saying all that scare you? No, not as much, because we've all heard the Orson Welles theory that it was just a story. That it was an H.G. Wells book, and just a story gave Orson Welles the last laugh in that whole La Communique. But that when he took advantage of RKO, right away he wanted to make a movie. Like, after Hearts of Age was like really short. It's only like 15 minutes long. It's got the devil, it's got death, it's got Orson Welles, it's got like this guy in blackface, and it's got this dwarf. And they're all playing chess at these different times, and it kind of looks like one of those really twisted avant-garde films that it was made in France, I think, but it was an American movie, and it was always, I found it weird that you could find a copy of it like at UCLA archive, among other places, on the avant-garde disc, that if you watch the whole thing, you get enlightened, because there's all these different movements which are taking impressions of light and sound and carrying them through the whole movie, and hoping that flicker response to each frame concerning the lighting getting brighter or less bright is what you're realizing about the film, that the light is getting less bright, that the light's getting bright, that like all of a sudden our attention, it's about directing attention, whether it's a jump cut or a cross cut or a parallel action. See, ultimately that's why film is entertaining, is because it always shows that in the next shot, this shot may be pretty regular and easy going, but in one of the shots of the film, there's going to have some stylized technique, and that's where the director comes in, and he gives the stylized technique. And really, it's amazing that they have films with directors that have the stylistic technique all the way through. That's actually theirs. I don't really say that that's been done too often, but when I do know that you can chart a kind of stylistics on anyone, like even Orson Welles, then you can take the basic fact that they were introducing new ways to edit, new ways to shoot, and new things to shoot. And that's what Orson Welles came up with Citizen Kane. He's like, we're going to make one like it's never been made. And like that, he's looking back on Stagecoach is one thing, but you can tell he's looking back to like the Italian, sword and sandal epics. Because he's got the whole thing of him risen like Spartacus, like Kane is like the hero of the day, which we never really find out why Kane is a hero or an anti-hero. We just kind of go on with it like, okay, we didn't like him or dislike him, but man, that was a hell of a good movie. You get this feeling that it becomes more stylistic than it does like about character. Like the character and plot are there, but character and plot inform the style of it jumping all around and telling his age at a different time than in linear context with Citizen Kane. So that he figured out he could do that with War of the Worlds was like switch between scenes. That happened earlier in the story, later in the story, And it's like Orson Welles chopped it all up with Citizen Kane, and he's like, I bet this is a way better movie. He probably thought it told out of sequence. And not many movies are told out of sequence. Even if it was on purpose, it wasn't always the way it ended up. And you think of a movie like, for instance, Run, Lola, Run, where Lola is the character and it's a German film. It's Tom Twyker, and she sits there in kind of this paused phase and looks to her right and looks to her left. She doesn't choose quite accurately which way to go. She's just got to go in one direction, finish that whole plot, come back to where she's standing, and then go finish that whole plot. And that there's any intersection between the plots isn't like Rashomon, which Rashomon is like all the stories of the same event that are different. So then you've got the director purposely saying, well, if I told the story from someone else's point of view, like Kurosawa was saying, then it would be a different story, although it's the same actions, it's a different technique to telling each story. The woodcutter has a different technique to him, and the woman being summoned from hell has a different technique, or like a horror film, and the woodcutter one's more like a samurai film. And you think these movies are the same story told 4 times, but it's never the same story. And like in each one, there's something so uniquely different about the camera movements that it looks like he set up all those shots independently and then mixed them back up into their event. But we'll never know, because he said that he was making the movie without those and only had those in there because of some trick he learned on Seven Samurai, which he'd been making for like 5 years earlier, been working on it. And when in 1950, when Rashomon came to America, finally they're saying, okay, now I see why you'd use intentional artifice on the editing, because intentional artifice means that there's more than one point of view about the whole scene. And if there's one point of view about the whole scene from a different perspective, then there isn't only one. There's another perspective. And that it looks different in Rashomon's one of the weirdest parts, because like who would have thought that up? Like that they were shooting and they may have found out. I don't know. But like if you had it planned to tell the same story 4 times, wouldn't you just take one minor detail and kind of change it a little bit? But this takes the whole story and chunks it into subjectivity of the person with the POV telling that part of the story, whether it matters or not, whether it clears anybody's name. And that's the way they see the story. And what's so weird is they all see it that are involved in the like courtroom or out of court thing, that they're going to hang this samurai for what happened. And none of it really affects that. They never say if they're going to or anything. You don't think they do, because he's like at the Rashomon gate with the guy and his kid. It's all like this humanistic ending where he's actually like friendly with this guy at the Rashomon gate. And you think, if all those things happened in a due time and it took more time for each one of them to tell the story, that isn't that kind of one of the cheap shots about like courtrooms anyway? because the courtroom is always going to say, all right, next witness. It's like one person told the story one way, but they didn't see it from everybody's perspective. And that just means, like, in some perspectives, he could have been guilty. In some perspectives, maybe not, whether it was his or not. So, the guilt thing is always commoned up. And it's probably a secret of, like, lawyerism, but it's always conjured up by no two people see the same thing happen. Even when they're watching movies, they don't see the same thing happen. I mean, one of the reasons for that is the timing of our blinking versus the timing of a quick edit. And quick edits are really popular all throughout, even the Citizen Kane all throughout. Like, by the time to Birth of a Nation's out, the smaller segments are used in bigger contexts, and that's sort of been the way it's been ever since. Is that there's smaller times of clips, even from before Citizen Kane. I mean, there were smaller clips, and then they were all deuced together in this kind of like suitor-tutor way. That is, every little bit of it was to improve on the next shot that was coming. It was like progress. The movie's making progress as it goes. Like Jacques Tati or like Max O'Fools, like their shots, they follow around part of the shot to see if something else is interesting, and it usually always is. And if it isn't, it's interesting that the camera moved that way, like in Playtime by Jacques Tati. And by O'Fool, you get the sense in Lola Montes that he's saving everything the best for last. It's kind of one of those Heaven's Gates approach to a movie that, like, the last 30 minutes is going to be like Spartacus out. There's going to be such a big Roman war collision at the end of Heaven's Gate that, like, we can all hang in there during the, like, sheep trials that go on for, like, seemingly a month at a time. No, I'm kidding, but it's not that. It's that at the end of it, you still realize there's one big catastrophe they're coming for. That's foreclosure in the sense that the movie's done. Like, the movie has said what it needs to say, and then it can be done. And that's how they don't pick arbitrarily an ending. Actually, a lot of movies have been shot with separate endings just in case, and, like, it wasn't just Hollywood that was in that practice. You could go to Bollywood and a lot of their films still now, and even now with American films and everything, you're like, the ending when it stops may be for closure, but if it's for lack of closure, then that's like one of those big roller coasters that just drops you all the way at the end of it, and then it's just over. And it's like, well, okay, that was quite a climax. We weren't ready for that level of conflict, but the resolve of conflict was actually quite climactic. And, and then you're like, well, is that the idea of what Aristotle's Poetics are talking about? The idea that the ending has to be as finite on how the characters move throughout Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and how they change for each one. And yeah, Act 3 does usually have this total, like, catastrophic ending, like in the Ring Cycle. The Ring Cycle gets its most catastrophic in Valkyrie, the third part of the Ring Cycle, and we don't have to get into that right now. But the point is that, like, there are techniques that are used in stories all throughout the history of music and the history of theater that really connect with the history of film, and film only has to show what it wants to. Like, you can obscure the lens, you can make things that are in the picture look like they're not there, for a moment, and kind of see how there's a different perspective of even the camera operator is going to change the way that movies feels. That's one of the reasons they do that suitor-tutor code, where they take the small shots and build them together into one pattern for, like, an edited scene, and then you can add those scenes together that fit together in one sort of time and space area generality of the film, story and character, and there's observations to be made about these movements that, like, if you put a sequence in and it's like 3-second edits, not like it's changing through the channel, but it's like close up, establishing shot, for 3 seconds, then you have the blink time of a common human eye, they say, that you can blink just exactly where you need to not notice the edit. And editing can be noticed in every film. The suture code makes it seem like it can't be noticed, but if there was any editing on Masterclass, you'd know right away. And there isn't, because I've been sitting here delivering you the lecture. So now we're thinking of Orson Welles and like how his films calculate into the mainframe. And you look all through his films, from Hearts of Age to all the way to F for Fake. And F for Fake's really the one I meant to tell you about on this particular masterclass. Although we do have 4 other classes left, so don't miss out. They're going to be more on the subject of like stylistic observations by mainly Orson Welles, but how they're noticed in film and how you observe the observations of the director, by what he points to in either editing or camera work or whatever he's accentuating with a stylistic technique. Those are things he learned in the avant-garde movement, that if you do that, it'll focus everyone's attention on Gilead, and the next thing you do, you see the whole story take place, and it's like, so it all adds up to that. Although that it doesn't mean anything really, Rosebud, it does all add up to that, and that doesn't mean anything really. That just means they know that there's a connection between not William Randolph Hearst, but Charles Foster Kane going after the meaning of Rosebud. It's almost like his presence has demanded that we go after the meaning of Rosebud. Like we wouldn't have gone otherwise, but because it's him, we want to find the mystery, and it's like, well, why? Because it's him. Because there were some perplexing details in his personal life that seemed to have had effect on his personality, but we found out he was pretty much stone ground angry most of the time, just couldn't get to it until his business partners and other senators and everything took the stand and tried to melt him down in the courtroom. And there's a lot of courtroom scenes taken out of Citizen Kane. I remember when I was a kid and I saw it in the 80s, and it was like the whole movie seemed like a courtroom drama. Did it not? And then he wins the courtroom drama, and I'm like, but the new film now is like cycles, like, it's like you think you've seen a film like that, but it's like William Wyler or something. You think you've seen a regular run-of-the-mill film, but then you've seen these takes that are deliciously longer than 3 seconds, and you'll be blinking all through them. But that it still adds these parts together like they're meant to be in a sequence of editing, or a scene of editing, or a single filming of the editing that goes in little parts. And really, you're supposed to film all those parts like according to the time they're on screen, based on scripts. So it's like, if I have a 6-second shot, I'll film it after I film my 3-second shot that's supposed to come before it. And that way you never get like rooted out on which like shot you're supposed to be taking. You always know that way. And you can set it all up in a studio, like a box studio, and really make it look like almost anything, like wherever you are. And so Orson Welles knew that he could convince people of the medium of film, that the medium of film was his argument for why it should be made by artists, and less entertainers, but entertainers too, that are artists anyway. And Orson Welles is saying, but really the artistry of film comes through when we're allowed to direct the way we want to. And that was given as the politique d'auteur that Orson Welles was given out, as though they wanted him as a director, wanted his style in the modality of discovering film. And because he was such a big personality, he was able to, even the War of the Worlds thing, he was able to get like full control to most of his movies, or at least he didn't really get full control after Citizen Kane, but he definitely wasn't really told what not to do in many respects. Because like he'd go on a movie like The Stranger, and they'd have all these ideas for him, and he's like, no, just wing it. And so he wings that one, and it works really good. It's just kind of like a strange home movie of him chasing a Nazi around a building, And then you go right into his displays of Shakespeare. Well, we don't need to talk about it again, but Shakespeare and Orson Welles is a good combo. Because sometimes there's combinations where the Shakespeare doesn't seem like it's fitting, but because we see Chimes at Midnight later, the 2 earlier ones are totally redeemed. Because the Chimes at Midnight one is blockage from like several different scenes of Shakespeare plays. We talked about that. And so you got to look at the original Shakespeare plays, and you're like, the stylistic distinction in each of them is exuberant. Like when everybody's a shadow in Macbeth, the whole cast is a shadow. They're all walking, shadowing on the wall and like making their shadows move while you either read the subtitles. Because see, there was foreign interest in Orson Welles because he got control of his movie, and it was the first time since Murnau's Sunset that had happened, Sunrise, that had happened. And it wasn't like Orson Welles was just coming out of the clinch saying, I deserve this, I don't want to. He is like begging. He said, if I get full control of this, then that'll make up for everything that went wrong at the radio. And so he kind of caught him on this twisty, turny thought that like he'd get a chance to redeem himself. But when he was disappointed at the end of the first screening of Citizen Kane, he was disappointed because so much of it got left out that he wanted in that he went back and edited the real edit that he wanted, and that wasn't really seen until a little bit before Casablanca came out in 1942. But the movie had already been up for Best Picture, and it's out again, and it's a different version, and so people are like, oh, what happened to it? Maybe the first edit didn't go the way they wanted it. And, you look at a movie like way later in his career, like F for Fake, and it looked like he didn't even have to guard the magic plates this time, or, the film stock this time, because with F for Fake, you kind of get this feeling that he's in control of the whole movie for once, like majorly, like intentionally, because here he is a magician. It's in the 70s, Now he's this magician, and he's showing off that he can make things seem real that aren't, but sometimes he does things that are real. So he'll do things that are real, like he'll conjure a diamond out of his hand, and it'll be like a real one, and somebody will get it and be like, then he'll bet on the next guy and be like, I bet your necklace that, I can make that diamond reappear in my hand. And this time he does it, and they pick up the diamond, and they're looking at the diamond, and it's like a fake diamond. So now you have the whole idea of like, he can put a real one with a fake one, and now you don't know which one is which. And so they're all faked out. And he's doing jokes like that all through the film, and that there's this exploitive narration that's going on about how this is how it's like a French spiel about how like this is how he wants to do it, like Breathless style, narrator. This is how he wants everything to happen, and this is what he's trying to do. And some people think he does fake on purpose, and we like that he does fake on purpose, and we think that's just to confuse people. And confusion is like the beguilement that attracts you to this mysterious magician, and they keep saying that. It's like, and really, I'm the whole time going, this reminds me of Robert Bresson's final film, L'Argent, which follows like a crumpled $5 bill all around the city, and like each person that exchanged it, the next person crumples it up and throws it aside, and you just are kind of like the camera's always on that one $10 thing, though they used lots of setups for that and everything, and then you see him using the $10 opposed to the reason that he did in the beginning at court. And so now you're thinking F for Fake. Well, it reminds me of that because it's like he's not a nickel and dime act, but he's trying to show them that nickels and dimes are an act, And he's trying to show them that nickel and dime acts are like not usually done by the poorest characters. The nickel and dime act was originated from that term, but now it's like, well, we could go jack the bank, and that's a nickel and dime act, because all they're going to have is nickel and dimes at my bank, right? But the point is Orson Welles was using this kind of obscura, this fake, this F for Fake, to sort of be this like guy who can show you that cinema makes it look real, even when it isn't. And he does a couple of magician problems, like cinema doesn't make its own problems, like problems occur in how the camera reacts in taking the picture to the world outside of it. If it takes it in such a subtle way that you can't even really tell it's going on, then you might have something you want for that kind of a slow, languid, deposited scene. But in typical, if you're directing the Hollywood classical cinema, and this goes for Orson Welles to an extent, is that you're still showing them the sequences in sequence. Like those don't start blocking out until Sam Peckinpah, when the sequence or something happens before what just happened and it happens after, like in Straw Dogs, when she's having that vision after she gets hurt or whatever, she's in the church. She's looking around and every like image is scary to her, but some of it's already stuff she saw and we saw as viewers in the film, so that can get a little overwhelming. When the editing goes back to the same edit it's a little overwhelming. Like, it's hard to put the tape in so close on cut and paste, And like, still, when Peckinpah shot a shot, he knew how it was going to be these collision montages. In most of his movies, he used collision montages, and that there's a little bit of collision montage in Orson Welles. I mean, Hearts of Age practically is collision montage, but it's silent era. But that Orson Welles was a lot more keen at sound is one of the interesting things we'll learn from Citizen Kane on. And F for Fake, the kind of like jazz music that was on, and the jazz record that he's trading for to do a trick. That boots back to, these kind of timed moments in Citizen Kane when there was music coming from the characters of the movie, whether bad or good, on purpose or bad or not. Because when his wife is singing opera, there's this total entrance into what opera would sound like if it was like kind of amateur. And I found it fascinating because I didn't find the singing to be a problem. I mean, it was. They were purposely going out of note, and this is why I'm not not totally a music guy really, because I like music that sounds like it's crashing and smashing. I mean, if it's crashing and smashing, then like it's more like a film for me, and I can see that moment. Excuse me, in Terminator 2. Sorry, don't know why that happened. There was a truck in the Terminator 2 where that giant semi goes off the thing in the LA River and blows up. I mean, you can always think of that scene as a way to get you going in the morning, Like you're getting up in the morning and you're like, he's like, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It's like, I love those quotes because they get you ready for the day and get you pumped. But a lot of people that don't like films and don't like worship films or even like have a different view on how you worship films don't even know if you're a sacred enough person to re-quote the most re-quotable lines in cinema history. Even though everybody freaking re-quotes some movie. I mean, everybody's re-quoted Star Wars. Citizen Kane is an interesting composition like all of Wells' writing. It's really in depth and it cycles through like different places. So it's no wonder the film was so perfectly set out of orders because it was all storyboarded ahead. That's how he knew what film canisters to save was from the storyboard. So, anyways, he's got this thing going on with F for Fake, and it's Orson Welles trying to say, well, you can still get duped by the artist, the filmmaker. Yeah, you can still get duped. And you could still mess it up. You could mess it up, yeah, if you were told what you could do. Or you do it intentionally, dupe them, mess it up, and then do it right. And it's like the shell game at that point, because the film hides, the editing hides where the bullet goes, Like the angle that they shoot you at doesn't have much to do with like your bullet hole being back here. And you're always like, as an actor first time, you're like, yeah, but can they see this amazing makeup job you put on my back? And sometimes just the knowing that it's there can fulfill for a director with long takes urge to get that in the shot, whether it just changes the environment by affecting them psychologically. And that Orson Welles did a lot of that, and that's why F for Fake is so great. Because he's saying, in the end, they're going to say Orson Welles made a lot of different films, right? But how do you know which ones are really his and which ones are fake? Because he had to go through that at that period of his own work and say, well, I'm digging out the ones I didn't do first and said I did. And that was nothing that we've talked about in here. But there were a bunch of films that he had directed that were shelved for whatever reason. Like he worked constantly. He'd make like 3 movies a year and walk away with one of them. He's walked away with like 16, 17 titles that we've been able to tell you, but he must have made 50 or 60 movies. And the Lost Treasury, we don't even know if it's a Lost Treasury, like whether it's a piece of paper saying, this is the film I'm going to make, like with Don Quixote, or that it was just some secret project that he had with some studio, and the studio just wanted to see like one angle of the shot, and then after that they were like turning him back loose to his movie. So F for Fake would just say, well, if someone else takes credit in those movies that they're Orson Welles, he's like, eventually time will find them out. He's like, I don't want the movie money off of somebody else's movie that ends up not being mine, and then I have a litigation way down in the future of my relatives. You've got to check the copyright thing so exactly that even though Charles Foster Kane was William Randolph Hearst. That is, Orson Welles made him Citizen Kane only for legalities, although William Randolph Hearst said, yeah, that's okay. You can have our name in the movie. We know it's not totally about us, but yeah, they were looking forward to it. They're like, we want to see a movie about us. And then he's not really telling them that he has the really controversial stuff in, which he doesn't. And that whole story happens. But like, again, if that story had been in the movie, it'd seem a little show-stopping. Like, to the point that it was the climax of the film, if that scene had been in there where Thomas Ince shoots Charlie Chaplin and all that aboard the ferry. And we've talked about all that, and it's like, well, that could have made a home movie out of it at the time, even. And they were saying there was. But do they really want the whole world seeing it? And do they want anyone seeing that? Do they want to watch it, for instance, maybe out of oddity? But the thing that ties us together to the screen, even in nonfiction, is the storyline. And I know nonfiction just means it's a true storyline in one of its own ways, but if it's a made-up storyline, then that's mostly what cinema and even nonfiction is picking up. That the story of the nonfiction is real life, the fiction story can go in whatever genre it depends on, You start to load up on the story, and right away, when you're loading up on characters, writing out scratch notes, you're kind of thinking, well, what kind of story am I writing? Is this a Western? And, I like how Orson Welles kind of clipped past the different styles and only did this kind of like ongoing melodrama throughout his career. It seems like there's a little bit of comedy and touch of evil, but only in a dark way. It seems like this kind of malaise of melancholia sits over you when you watch Orson Welles. It's just the banner you need for film noir, to expose out that these are clues that film noir is being built, and it's a melodrama. It's a melodrama in almost all of his movies, right? So what do we know from the melodrama genre? Well, we know that it's distinctly on character. It's on the character within the story, not so much the life of the actor, which we find interesting someday. But like right now, when you're watching the movie, you're interested in the character and what the character does in his life and what the character is like. And is he nice to women? And you kind of develop these like cultures of like why certain movies have things in them that others don't. Like, why would Westerns have cowboys on horses? And like a melodrama, he'd be in a film noir, walking down a street alley, got the whole gangster image on. And gangsters and detectives and everything kind of follow with that same genre, the genre of gangsterism, and it's like, well, we all love a good, a lot of us that are film buffs, we love a good movie in any genre, but I do know that like having one or two genre throwbacks to not knowing really much about them is personal, and every genre in cinema has been studied. Every director has, I'm sure, except for some new ones. And every study you can think of in terms of film has been done. I mean, that doesn't make it a bad thing. That means you're supposed to find a discourse you're interested in, tear into it, see what the really minute things about that film you like, the minute things that could have been changed. And if you get really into it, you can do one of those like analyzations of why the scenes are there. But in F for Fake, a lot of it's to trick you. Like, he'll be standing in one area in the street, one scene, it'll be the same area in the next scene, but he's gone, and in the same area, and he's back. And you can kind of not notice it because it's all shot on like this big polymorphous frame, and it's like, it's hard to see that video on VHS. Don't even get me started. Orson Welles, VHS doesn't quite give it the glory. If you have no other way, that's okay. But the glory is given to the digital technology, which can put a lot more information on a little amount of space. And that's what they do. On DVDs, they put all the information on all the little space. They're the digital space, and then it blows it up to the TV. It's beautiful. It's like a disc projector, You all know about DVDs and Blu-rays and all that. Criterion has some good ones for sale on all the accounts, like especially foreign films. And there are Orson Welles films, like Mr. Arcadin, I know was on Criterion Collection. Mr. Arcadon was the perfect one because it had all those characters that were kind of coming out of that box, and like they were looking like they were pruned down to be that character, and that they took this kind of attitude towards the audience who they're explaining things to. And it's like this detective again, like sort of Citizen Kane style, and they're trying to figure out how Mr. Arcadon died, if he's even dead, if he's taken back off, and all these things. And those guys end up telling them some story about when I first met Mr. Arcadon, and it's like, okay, now we know that he is not only missing, but we're going to get a chipper part of his story. But that they look framed like they're a little grotesque, the characters, is only because he has costumes on them that are like obtrusive, like costumes of like some guy will be carrying a bird cage, And so with that for fake, you really only get faked out 2 or 3 times though. And it's when he's got this like gold bracelet, and he takes it off and he gives this to this woman and he shakes her hand, and then it's gone from both of them. And this is towards the end, and they want to know what happened to it, and neither one of them find him. And then later, at the last image of the movie, he holds it out, and it's the watch, it's the bracelet. And he's like, he picks it back up, and he puts it in his pocket, and he's like, oh, well, because he was like, I was going to give that back to her, too. I mean, it's like, of course, there has to be a closing line like that. Now, you think back to what we talked about last time, and about how Orson Welles was taking actor parts to do all of his movies, and that's just saying it paid better as an actor, for John Cassavetes and Orson Welles to make their money that way instead of doing on these risky films that are titles of films that are way experimental compared to the usual Hollywood classical. Even though the editing is similar in ways, it's a completely different technique to run 2 blocks together than have the shape keep changing to a different shape, And there's really so much you can do with film noir that one of the limiting factors of it is nice that it confines you to a dark, shadowy medium that nothing's ever really properly brought to light. And so you get this feeling with that break that like they're making artifice to create something to look real, and in Magnificent Ambersons we just expect it that it's real. Like that those are the things that Joseph Cotten was really doing with his new car. And I'm like, well, that doesn't bother me when there's artifice there. When they show it is, they better have a good reason. Like one of the only movies I know that completely subverts the archaeology of movie making is Dogville, and how it has these sort of like sprayed out pavements of squares, and you're inside of them, and that's in the house. I mean, like, the set is not there to be an artifice later to be deconstructed, later to be taken down and say that was our set. Since the set is gone, like we act with all these skills we would in a movie as though that's the obstruction we're limited with. And then we look at it like, well, that contains them in this box. Like our houses really contain us in these boxes, And so it shows that they're contained in there, and that's where they live. But like, technically, it doesn't look like there's a house there. It's just chalk on the ground. And that can be a lot to do with containment and the way people feel in their house. And they feel like it already is, in a small town like that, they feel like it is already a conduit for other houses to find out information and things. And I understand that there's like this whole, now that they don't have borders on their house, they can kind of see in, but they kind of can't. And it really wiggles through the room of a shot without really condensing any of the ways the shots would flow, whether there were buildings there or not. More so than if they would have been there, and just that they're not. So, what did we learn? We learned that every stylistic comes with an experimental way of, like, you can obstruct, take that thing out, take an image out, or you can purify, you can add to the image. And this is where I get back with that special effects nowadays, because they add to the image. They already have the image pretty much perfected, and we're all going to be wowed and gawked by the beginning of a great movie. But if it goes on, and then they show us that they unhocked it and tore it all apart, well, then that's not normal. Or that, like, later it went seamless and became like this one long take at the end. Which the passenger is like one of those ones where it has a long take. But just think, in films now that they have special effects, it saves them time, saves them money from blowing the real thing up. Although creating it again does take, video, and does take coding on a computer. And so we're putting these exciting special effects in to be even more bling, even more ching ching in the film. And it's like, but at the same time, the film needed those explosions. In the 1950s, if they needed them, they'd just be kind of far off, so they can set the blow a little ways off. I like, again, when that bus blows up in the Hitchcock movie Stage Fright, or not in Stage Fright, but I can't think of it. It was a Stagecoach. Sorry, Alfred Hitchcock does this movie, and I can't think of what it is right now. But there's this little kid who gets on a bus, and he's got his dog and his film canister with him, and he sits next to a nun. But his film canister had a bomb on it the whole time. It's like the clock's all ticking at him to catch the train. He drops some ice cream, and then boom, the whole thing goes up. And I thought, well, they still had to film the actual bus explosion from far away, but that they zoomed in on, or but that they filmed it with no one in there blowing it up isn't the first question we have as spectators. We're thinking, so we're never going to see that kid in the film again, and that really was a cool kid. And, it's like, well, we weren't like spanking him on morals. He was just in the obstructed. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So now we like are so for granted, like, to take on the other scenes we've seen that are outre in movies, like the action or the violence or the sex, and we bank on those as being stylistically clever, like the stylistic cleverness of Orson Welles in An Unvanquished Journey. It's like that he can get these veils of erotica to match up, and then in That for Fake, he's getting these veils of like cinema obscura. And so that's what I'll talk about at the end of this lecture right now, cinema obscura. See, cinema obscura, strangely enough, is an idea that almost goes back to the avant-garde. Well, it does. But it even goes into like when those early days they were testing cameras, like before the 20s, the 19-teens, when they were testing cameras and they were seeing what all they could do. And they would realize that like the lens cap would obscure the brightness of the film going in when they're testing it. I mean, this is all Thomas Edison testing, And so the obscure thing is what you don't see, But you can tell it's there, or have a feeling it's there, or really what's behind that cabinet and that scene in Total Recall. It's like we can basically get something that's going to pop out from there without even, that crate and Creep Show. It's like Pandora's box rule. If you're going to bring the box in, you got to show what's inside of it, even if you wait till the end of the movie with like Rope by Hitchcock. Because there you have the guy already dead inside the chest of drawers that's been in the whole movie, and you don't find out till the very end that he was in there. And you're like, but if you watch carefully at the beginning, there's some sort of obscured, in terms of edited fast, scenes of them dropping that body off. And it doesn't really make a moral qualification on either level, though does try to exact the Nietzschean Übermensch into. And there was something about that on one of Orson Welles' movies. It was the one with Lady from Shanghai. There we go, Lady from Shanghai. That he did those kind of things. He would film a scene of something happening, and then kind of just zoom by it with his tracking shot. And that's something that almost like Kubrick or Coppola would do, like kind of just have the action going and kind of have the tracking shot leaning through, not necessarily forward or backward, but leaning across this long take, and it keeps going, and that will seem seamless, and is the idea of editing in the extent, because you're trying to make four people look like they're in the same place with editing. But if they are in the same place, then you don't always have to have editing. Sometimes you do, because it depends on the way they're looking at the film. But that Lady from Shanghai is kind of this risky film noir. He mentions the Übermensch in it. Like, there's this idea, even in The Stranger, there's this idea that there's sort of this common coterie of someone that's greater than all and can transcend all limitations and can be great. And that's really what Orson Welles wants to be. But then when he finds out, like when he's making Mr. Arkadin, that there are a lot of flaws to human integrity that cause them to take choices over the years that never really seemed like they worked out. But if they didn't work out, was there any theme to any of it, or was it all just caused a madness? Was it just all blah, that went wrong, and this is what wrong? And not many movies do you get the movies where everything goes wrong. I do like some movies like that. Like I like the Weekend by Jean-Luc Godard. How it has these matter smash jump cuts, and it has all these very detailed long takes, that long take with the car going across and it's passing all the other cars and it keeps going. It's like way out in the middle of France. And they're things we haven't seen, so we love seeing them. So in those sense, we love seeing them. But when it's something the director doesn't want to show you, you can spend your life like trying to figure out why or what it was. And in some cases, the smoking gun. And in some cases, it never opens the box. And you're never allowed to reach in and find out what it was. And I think that's like the movie Seven. You don't really want to know what's in the box. It could be like my copies of that version of Seven that came late. So I was mailing them back. That's what I swear they got that day. No, I'm kidding. But I was just a little kid watching that movie, and I was like, I don't really want to know what's in the box. Does anybody else? So it's like, and then you go to Fouillard's severed head and all that, and how that's in the box, and you might really see one, and he's really working at the Grand Guignol and all that. So then you're at cinema entrance of cinema history, and they're already obscuring things to show them later to connect the episodes, like in Fouillard. But like if you show it later, then and it was rounded up to, you're still obscuring it from one notion. And in F for Fake, he's always obscuring the sleight of hand because there is a little bit of magic to it. He does know there are painters that try to be copy painters, but some of those are different because some of them are making artworks that can last because it's a better copy than the one up here, and they can paint it in an exact way. And they train their whole life to paint it in the exact way, and they've got to make these, corrections on the painting. Not that the painting changes. Because, like, some of us have the feeling that paintings change more than they look. But like if they're branded in a book and that's the way everybody's used to it, yeah, that's canon now to our culture. But really, there could have been like other paintings that were supposed to go up. But like since they were so famous in wherever they are in Europe and the MoMA in New York and everything, I think what's not seen on the painting is still the obscura, but you're still questioning the obscura. And that's with Cameron obscura. You're questioning the details that were off in the rest of the world that you couldn't see and were obscurified from. Whereas like cinema verite is like, let's turn on the camera and see what happens. It's more like an Andy Warhol production. It's like, let's turn on the camera and just go. And just make a movie right out of the bat. We'll have some crazy sex, in it. We'll smoke cigarettes. Yeah, it'll be great. And that style of filmmaking I really like is verite, because then you never know what the turnout's going to be, so you're not really obscuring things, but are, because you kind of guess what the outcome is going to be. And you sometimes draw attention to it and sometimes don't. But then at the end, it reaches that total ruckus of a climax that it hadn't had the whole movie. And whoosh, the conflict resolution saves it right after it goes off the edge. Then when the denouement is, we're all kind of with our beating hearts going, what just happened? And movies can be a really entertaining quality of it is that they're visceral and cathartic, because you need that from something you see as yourself, but something that you see as yourself doing something you'd never do normally. Because it's a film fantasy that they can make things happen that way just because the script says it is kind of arbitrary, because the script is outlining how the movie is actually going to look and function. Not a lot of people know that about scripts. They think it's just the dialogue or whatever, but it's actually setting up exactly how the film should look. That's why some scripts are written alongside the film, and there are different ways of doing them. But, well, it looks like we reached the end of our class for today. Yeah, and that was a fun time. I really enjoyed that. But one thing you've got to remember is if something's covered up in a film and you never see it, that could be scary to your psychological until you let it go. But, like, something that's not covered up and showed the whole time, and then is told it wasn't there, like that Usual Suspects thing, is always a way to jump back to frame one of the film and fast forward through the whole thing to see what you missed, And I'm not saying that that was really the style they were doing. They were more jumping back to reveal the mystery, you know. But like if you follow it back with the secret, the knowing the ending is the way it is, of course the perspective the second time through is not going to be the same. So, and really with most of these Orson Welles films, Citizen Kane, Dead for Fake, they're really not the same movie twice. They may not be the same print. They may not be his exact like guidance as to how it got made. The Stranger may even be a movie he doesn't know about anymore. He's dead, but it's like that he took on these big parts acting. Yeah, it was to get money for the films, but did he dislike the characters he acted in? No. We know that from A Man for All Seasons and Moby Dick that Orson Welles loved being considered a good Hollywood actor. And now I will face you to the last four of these discussions, and we will further see if we can get along with Orson Welles, even though we've gone through most of his filmography.